Hi guys, welcome back to the Art of Server, and welcome back to part 3 of the hybrid desktop PC server build series. In part 3, I'm going to go over the server side of this build and show you all the components used for the Mini-ITX server we built in the Phanteks Evolv X case. What follows is going to be a series of clips I recorded while building the server side of this project. I'll show you how the installation went, but more importantly, I'll point out some of the quirks we ran into and provide some tips if you're going to be building a similar project. I will leave timestamps down in the video description, so if you want to skip ahead to a particular section, feel free to do so. And if you're new here or you missed the previous videos in the series, I recommend you go back to check those out. I'll leave links to those videos in the description as well. Now, before we get started, please do me a favor and hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm so more people will get to see this video. Also, if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss my videos. Alright, let's get started. Alright guys, so here are all the server parts for this build. I just want to kind of briefly go over them. So here is a Mini-ITX motherboard. This is a Supermicro Xeon D motherboard, so it's very low power consumption. It's got a by 16 PCIe slot, an M.2 slot, 6, let me get this out of the way, 6 SATA ports with one of them that has the special, the orange one that you see there is able to power a SATA DOM SSD. And I'm using 16 gigabyte DIMM modules. These are I think ECC, well ECC for sure, I think DDR4 2400 I believe. And I'm using low profile ones because I was a little concerned that maybe there would be some clearance issues since there's not a lot of space for all this. And this has its own built-in fan, and back here is the power switch. Then this is going to be sticking out the rear of the Phanteks case so that you can power on this server board separately. And also in the M.2 slot I have a Intel Optane SSD there. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to use it for, but I suspect I'll be running a NAS of some sort. And so if there's a use case where I can benefit from a slog device, I might use that for that, because if you don't know, these Optanes are very high endurance and very good with IOPS, so that could be a benefit for that. But I do have a 32 gigabyte I think SATA DOM module right here, and so that's primarily where I'm going to probably put the OS for this. And I haven't decided yet what I'm going to do about the software stack for this server. But anyway, I think I've got the right hardware in there, and there's 64 gigs of RAM, so that's pretty good for, I guess, for my son to play with and stuff like that. Now, earlier I had mentioned that I had to get an extension cable. So yeah, this Phanteks case, even with the Revolt X Phanteks power supply, just doesn't really have the length for a lot of cables, and I've had to get extension cables for various parts of the build, and this is one of them. So when this is installed upside down inside the case, this side is where the motherboard tray is going to be, and so the power cable has to go to that side, but it's plugged in on the opposite side here, and so the ATX power cable from the PSU just isn't long enough to reach across to the other side, and so I had to get this extension cable in order to make that even feasible. Alright, so the PCI, that PCI slot right there is going to be connected to this PCI riser cable, and this is the bracket that holds the PCI slot to the bottom of the case in a vertical position. So normally people would use this to install a GPU vertically, I suppose, but you know, this is Art of Server, we talk about storage here, so instead of installing your GPU to show off vertically, we're going to install an HBA card instead. And so of course for that I've got my 9200 or 92018i LSI HBA card. So this is good enough for hard drive use, and that's what we've got. We got 6 SAS hard drives, and I specifically picked this one because it's the one with all the blinky lights, and so if we're going to show it off, we might as well have some lights to go with it. And of course then the hard drives are these guys over here, and this is just one of the brackets. Each of the brackets holds 2 drives. I've got 4 sets of these. One is already installed at the bottom, and then I've got 3 more, including this one, to install later on. So we're going to have a total of 8 SAS 4 terabyte drives. So this is just for my son to kind of play around with and learn about servers and stuff like that. So I don't really think he needs a lot of storage, but and this is probably way too much for what he needs right now anyway. But anyway, I've got more of these that are all set up and ready to go, and we're going to go ahead and install all this in that Phanteks case as the desktop slash server hybrid build. Hey guys, so I'm about to install this extra fan right here, and so there's the case. This Phanteks case originally comes with these 2 fans, but you can see down here I've got 2 hard drives down there that are not going to get any airflow, and so I'm a little concerned about those drives overheating. And so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these fans down there, which is going to open up enough room on the top for another 140 millimeter fan. And so I picked up another one of these Phanteks fans that's identical to what's already in the case. Now before I do that, here's the wiring. So those 2 fans are connected to this fan hub up here, and I'm going to loosen up these cables so I can move those fans down, and then plug in the third new fan into this header in the middle here. Alright, so unwound the fan cables. That should give me enough room to move the cables or the fans down, and then I'll just tie them back up afterwards. So I'm just going to loosen these screws up just enough to slide the fan down. Now it looks like the top one I might have to remove completely. Alright, so see if I should be able to slide this guy down. Trying to figure out here which cable it's pulling on over here. Alright, that's the one. Go ahead and install the screw. Alright, next I'm going to move this top fan down to the middle. Now I think I'm just going to lightly put these screws in here so that it can slide around a little bit. I want to check the fitment of the third fan I'm going to install here. So hopefully this is going to fit. All right, I think that should work. I'll do that after I get this fan secured. So I'm going to start by snaking the cable through, kind of getting that in position first. That looks good. Now the nice thing is that Phanteks provides a little organizer case with all the screws. So the screws I need for the fans are in here. Start with the corner. Nothing is obstructing the fans. Looks good. Alright, so this one that's still connected is the fan in the middle. Alright, so I'm just going to use a twist tie. Alright, so tie that up and we'll just tuck that away underneath. This is the fan I just installed. So yeah, this one is really close. So I'll have to roll this up. Plug that in. This is for the bottom fan. Alright, so should be able to close this now. Alright, so next step is I'm going to be installing the riser cable. This is going to go to the Mini-ITX board up on top, but this cable is going to go behind the motherboard tray. And the PCI slot here that we're going to use for a HBA card is going to sit vertically over here. And in order to do that, there's this bracket that comes with the case. So if you're doing this build, by the way, this cable is a separate purchase, and it's a rather pricey one. I think I had to pay about $60 for this. But this bracket does come with the case. It's in the accessories box. And there's actually two positions where you can mount this. So there's two sets of holes here. And you can mount it, say like that, where it's basically in the very rear slot. And this will probably give you the most, if you're mounting a graphics card, for example, this will probably give you the most clearance between the GPU and the glass panel. So that's probably the most ideal setup for cooling, at least. But if you wanted to, you could actually move it a little bit closer to the side panel, so you basically have the PCI slot in this middle slot here. So there's two different positions, but I don't really see a good reason to want to put it in this position. And I'm going to, although we're not installing a GPU, I'm going to put it in this rear position anyway. Alright, so first I got to attach this bracket to the PCI riser cable over here, and then attach the bracket to the case, and then we'll snake this down the hole right over there. Hopefully you can see that. All right, so anyway, it's gonna put this bracket on first. So it's these these are probably the smallest screws available in that screw organizer that comes with the case, and these are the ones that I'll be using to connect this PCI bracket to the riser cable. All right, so that's it. Ready to go. I'm going to start by snaking this through. It is a little bit tricky to get this in there. All right, we managed. It's there. All right, I'm just kind of pulling it through from the other side. All right, so next step, I'm going to screw this plastic bracket down to the bottom of the case. So anyway, I got myself a little stubby screwdriver. All right. All right, so we got the PCI slot, or the vertical PCI slot installed. And now I'm going to show you the other side where we have to move one of the cable ties and show you how I'm going to route the riser cable. All right, so here's the back side of the case. Here's that PCIe riser cable that we just snaked through behind the motherboard tray, and this is going to go straight up here to the ITX board that's up here. Well, this cable tie right here kind of gets in the way of this cable going straight up that way. So Phanteks actually, I think, thought about this, and there's another position to mount these cable ties, so you have to unscrew these and move them over to this location. All right, and then we'll just unscrew this Velcro tie and move that over here. Okay, so we can still use this to tie down some of these cables, but the PCI riser will have plenty of room to go up here. Now, I think this is going to actually be a little bit longer than we actually need. So once everything's set up with the ITX board, I'll probably want to fold this down a little bit and kind of tuck some of this excess cable down in here behind this door here. So anyway, that's it for installing the PCI riser. Just wanted to share that with you guys. Hopefully it's helpful if you happen to be also be using this case and installing a dual system in it. All right, so the next step is to install the Mini-ITX board, and this is going to go up on top here upside down. And so you got to remove the top cover, and basically this is pretty simple. You take out these two thumb screws, which I've already removed, and you can slide this top panel to the rear and it comes right off. Alright, so there's a mounting plate up here that's held down by two thumb screws and a couple of hooks over here. So we'll just unscrew that. Now the weird thing is that, okay, so this comes right off. Alright, so the weird thing is that this Mini-ITX board is actually going to be attaching to this plate. And it basically, this is going to be upside down like this. See. And this, it's going to screw onto this plate. And so it's going to kind of sandwich the frame here. This is going to be on top, this is going to be on the bottom. And it's going to sandwich the top frame of the case. So it's kind of an awkward system because you're going to be finagling this ITX tray underneath while you're trying to screw it on from the top. So it's not really, I don't know, this is one area where I felt like maybe they could have thought this through a little bit to make it a little bit more user friendly. But anyway, we're going to try this. Now the other challenge is getting this PCI riser plugged in to the Mini-ITX board. So I think I'm gonna have to plug all that together first before I position the Mini-ITX board. All right, so I'm gonna use the slot over here for this power cable, for the ATX power cable. Because I don't think I can really go through here since I've got the PCI riser over here. Alright, so I'm going to pass the ATX power through here and get the PCI riser. So fortunately this has a little bit of length. Allows me to kind of manipulate it a little bit. So I'm going to have to plug this in here. Alright, so just able to plug that in right there. Now I got to position this ITX board, the ITX frame underneath the top frame. And back here is a hole where the power button for this board will come out. Okay, I know you guys can't see what I'm doing here, but there's a fan cable right here in the corner that's for the rear fan, and I think it's kind of getting in the way. So I'm trying to push it around the frame of the ITX board. All right, there we go. I think got it out of the way. And there's the button sticking out for the ITX board. So now this, see, I think it would have been great if they found a way for you to attach this just to the upper frame instead of sandwiching it with the other frame for, you know, the fan mounting frame. So I'm gonna have to kind of let this just sit here, and it's kind of just sitting on top of the CPU cooler, which I'm not a big fan of doing that, but it is, I mean, it's not too heavy, so I guess it'll be okay. Alright, so now I got to position this back. Alright, now I'm going to go get the screws for the ITX frame. Alright, so here are 4 screws. So let me start just holding it up. And yeah, I think that's the right position. You can feel the buttons protruding out. So I'll start with this one back here. And then I'll do this corner here. Okay. And then this corner. Then the last one over here. Alright, so that's attached. Now, one thing I didn't realize when I was just kind of reading about how to do this Mini-ITX board install in this Phanteks case, and I didn't realize that I thought the I/O panel was going to be like right here for that Mini-ITX board, but it is a little bit recessed here, so there is a little bit of a gap. I don't think it's going to really affect anything. Perhaps if you've got some cables that you're trying to plug in here, they might be a little bit more difficult to pull off, but I think there's enough clearance, and we're really not going to be plugging that much into here other than some Ethernet cables, you know, for the IPMI and then also for the main Ethernet interface. That's, I think, primarily the only thing we're going to be plugging in the rear here. All right, so we got that installed. Now I just got to connect the ATX power, and so we're going to do that next. All right, so I think the first thing I'm going to do is tuck away the excess PCI riser cable down here. Just kind of push it down. There, and I've got these other cables here, the SATA cable and the audio cable, so I'm going to try to tuck that up here. All right, and tie that down. All right, so hopefully that should be able to close. Yeah. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. There's enough space down here, down over there, for the SATA cables to go in, and this is the 24-pin. This is the, hopefully you can see that, that's the 24-pin ATX power cable for the secondary system, and I'm going to plug that into this here. Now, ideally, it would be nice if I could run this over here to hide it behind that panel, but I don't think that's going to happen. This cable is just way too thick, and so I'm just going to have to leave it kind of like this. So yeah, I think I'm going to have to close that up, and should be able to close this. And there's a little gap right here for this cable to come out. Okay, so we got everything set up. We got the Mini-ITX board set up. We've got the PCIe riser. We've got power. So at this point, we'll probably be able to power on the Mini-ITX system along with the main desktop PC in here. But we're not done yet, because I've got to get the storage controller and the rest of the hard drives. I only got the 2 drives on the bottom mounted so far. We've got to mount the other 6 drives and connect all the power, and then we'll get all the SAS cables hooked up to the SAS controller that's going to be in that vertical slot. Alright, so that'll be next. Alright, so next I'm going to install the LSI HBA card in this vertical slot right there. Alright, there we go. Alright, so LSI HBA installed. Now we just got the hard drives to install and run all the SAS cables. Alright guys, so unfortunately I didn't record the installation of the hard drives, but I just wanted to kind of go over what was done. So actually I had a slight misunderstanding on how these hard drives are supposed to fit. So right here you can see that I have all the the 6 drives here, and then there's 2 more drives down in the power supply bay. And so there's a total of 8 hard drives that are now installed. I originally thought that these hard drives would have the these are SAS drives, the SAS connector facing out this way, and so I would just run the cables and connect them from the front. But the way these are designed, they actually have to connect from the rear, and so I had to reverse the way I mounted these hard drives, and that necessarily forced me to kind of do better cable management. So I know probably in some of the previous shots you saw the cable mess that I was trying to hide in the back. Well, you know, I couldn't ignore that anymore, and I'll get to that in a second here. But okay, so anyway, I have these 2 SAS cables that go towards the back, and these are basically SFF 8087 to SFF 8482 breakout cables, and that's because I'm using the 8482 breakouts because I have SAS drives in here. If they were just SATA drives, I could probably just use a SATA breakout cable, but in this case I have to use the SAS breakout cables basically. So alright, let me show you what's going on the other side of this, because and that's really the reason why I didn't record this, was when I realized that you can't really mount the hard drives with the connector facing out, because there's not enough clearance between here, the glass door, and this drive, because when you mount it the other way, the drive actually sticks out a little bit this way, and so there's just not enough clearance to actually even plug a connector in. It would be right up against the glass door. So alright, let me show you what's on the other side. Alright guys, here we are. So as you can see, the cable mess that I had previously is, I would say, much improved. Basically, all the chassis cables, so including fans, front I/O panel, all that stuff that was kind of tied up in this area right here, I had to move away or move out of the way, because all the SAS drives are connected through these little rectangular holes on this panel here. And so if I had all those cables tied up here, there was just no way I was going to be able to plug in all the connections in the power for those SAS drives. And so instead, I basically undid all the wiring, all the chassis wiring. Here's some of the fan wiring that I previously done. All the chassis wiring is now neatly tied up in this channel back here. They're not even tied up by these zipped Velcro ties anymore. I zip tied them and put them in this channel back here, completely out of the way. And then all other cables that I had some of these cables kind of tied up in this area before, and again, I just can't do that because I need the room to plug in the SAS cables and the power cables here. So I moved everything over here, and I think I made it a little bit neater. And yeah, so I have let's see here. Yeah, so I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 drives, and you can see there's 2 more that go down here, and that's the 2 drives that are in the power supply area. So everything is connected, everything works. The only thing I'd have to say is, because I'm used to dealing with rack mount servers where the hard drives are fairly easy to remove, this is not going to be easy to remove when it comes time to addressing a situation where you have a failed drive. So that's going to be kind of a pain in the rear, especially the ones down here. You're going to have to shift all these cables out of the way. The 6 that are on top are not as bad, because I think you can just kind of open this panel here and disconnect this. And then there are these screws here on both sides. I think somewhere over here is another. These screws hold on to those cages that hold on to the hard drive. So you would have to disconnect the SFF 8084 connector and remove these screws. And there's a couple under here too. And then you can dismount the cage and then remove the hard drive from the cage, replace it, and then, you know, reverse of all that. So I think that's going to be kind of a pain in the butt. So hopefully I don't have too many hard drive failures with this system. But you know, if you are trying to build a server in a desktop machine, I mean, sometimes that's what you're going to have to deal with. Just wanted to mention something. If you're building a system like in this chassis, in this Phanteks Evolv X, as far as like running the power cables, I found that you kind of have to stagger them. So originally I was thinking, you know, just very straightforward, go from the power supply. Each of these SATA power cables from the power supply has 4 connectors. So I was thinking like, okay, connect one there, connect the second one there, connect the next one here, and the next one there, and then use the next cable to kind of do the next 4. And what I found is that when you do that, the spacing between the SATA connectors isn't wide enough, and so you just basically you can't reach. And so instead I have every other drive on each of those cables. So the first cable connects to the bottom drive down here, then so it skips the next drive and then goes to this drive, it skips this one and goes to the next one, and then skips skips this one, I think, and then goes to the next one there. And so by staggering the power connections, this kind of lined up generally better than it was previously. So anyway, that's pretty much all I have to say about the hard drive cabling. Sorry I didn't get to record the actual installation for you guys. I realized my mistake and was unmounting and remounting the hard drives and trying to figure out the cabling, and redid all this cabling. That was quite a bit of time and effort there. So I just kind of got into it and didn't really think about, turning on the camera at that point. But I think hopefully that description helps you guys out. I think when the case arrived, the way it arrived from the factory was that all these cables, the chassis cables, were tied inside these Velcro ties. And so I guess if you're not mounting any hard drives in this area, that might be okay. But if you are going to mount hard drives in this area, you definitely have to get all those cables out of the way. So I just wrapped everything up, zip tied them, and also here, let's show you on this side. So let's see, I don't know if it's visible, but there are these little hooks in this area here, and I have those cables, all these chassis cables, the fan cables, the front I/O panel, the USB-C, all that stuff, and then the RGB lighting cables and all that as well, basically bundled up. And then I zip tied them to these hooks to kind of keep them in that channel behind here so that they stay out of the way of this area. So now, of course, if I ever need to unplug a fan or replace a fan, that's really going to be a pain in the butt, because I'll have to cut all those zip ties down here to get some of these cables loose in order to replace the fan. But, fans don't fail too often, so I guess that's kind of a compromise that's acceptable. All right, so other than that, one other thing I wanted to mention was that I'm using the SATA power to drive this the fan hub that's up here, and also for the chassis RGB. And so there wasn't enough SATA power connections so I have one SATA power cable here and the second one here, so that's two, and then I have a third one that's powering these two SSDs. But in order to power these other connectors for the fan hub right there, and then also for the chassis RGB, I needed more connectors, and those I don't think draw a lot of power, so I went ahead and just got a splitter here, a SATA power splitter, to do that. Also, there's one more item that I'm going to talk about a little bit later, but that also needs another SATA power connection. So I have one spare right there for that thing. So, all right. So anyway, that is pretty much it for that. And now, so this thing can and does close. It actually closes better than it did before, just because a lot of those cables are no longer kind of in this area, but in this channel over here. And so it actually closes a little bit better. I was really trying to be lazy and, not try to get away with not doing that cable management, since it kind of came from the factory in this location. I thought, okay, just, why not just leave it as is? But yeah, if you're installing hard drives, you can't do that. You got to do better cable management, get as much out of the way as possible for the power and the SAS or SATA cables that you have here. All right, guys. So earlier I had mentioned that I needed an extra SATA power cord or connection for another item that I'm going to be adding to this machine. So you might have recalled earlier that I did also install a Mellanox. There's a Mellanox 10 gig card back there. And the motherboard that I'm using also has 10 gig built-in NICs, although it uses copper, and while the Mellanox is an SFP plus. But either way, they will work fine. And the reason for that is I know I have a lot of people who have contacted me saying, hey, I'm trying to build my home server. I only have like, Cat 5, Cat 6, 1 gigabit network set up in their house, but they really like to go with 10 gigabit. Or sometimes people are living in a place where they're renting and they can't really do too much to the house to run cabling or the apartment, but yet they still want a 10 gigabit connection. And so that's a little bit difficult and challenging sometimes. And a lot of times also, if you don't have a lot of machines that need to connect via 10 gigabit, you really only want to connect your file server to your main desktop computer. And that's kind of the idea behind this setup here, is that server motherboard has 10 gigabit connection, and this desktop PC motherboard also has a 10 gigabit connection. And so maybe all we need is to set up a 10 gigabit connection between the server and this desktop. And I wanted to do it all in one build, and so I got one of these. So this is a MikroTik 10 gigabit switch. These are pretty popular, so some of you guys may already know about this, but this is the CRS305-1G-4S+IN. And basically what that means is that this has 4 SFP plus 10 gigabit connections, and then there's a 1 gigabit management port. And you don't really want to drive too much traffic through that, because although the 10 gigabit ports are able to switch between them, if you go through the management port, that's going to go through the central CPU of this switch, and that's incredibly slow. So you don't want to do that. It's fine just for management traffic, if you just kind of need to log in, make a configuration change, that kind of stuff. But you keep your main traffic on these SFP ports. And so I have a SFP plus module for a copper connection, and then I bought a DAC SFP plus cable for the Mellanox to the switch. And so you may have noticed this because I actually already ran the cables earlier, but let me remove the power for the GPU here so you can see this. But yeah, earlier you may have noticed that I already ran these cables. So this is just a SFP plus DAC cable that loops out through a vacant PCI slot and plugs into that Mellanox card. And then this copper cable is just a short run of, this is actually just Cat 6A. But for a short run, it should be fine, even for 10 gigabit. And just kind of, again, goes out and then plugs into the 10 gigabit port on the back of the server motherboard. So by doing it this way, I basically have both my desktop computer, or this is actually my son's computer. So he has his desktop computer in this chassis. He has a server in this chassis with plenty of storage, and the desktop and the chassis can be connected via a 10 gigabit switch, which I'm going to be powering inside this chassis. So the 10 gigabit network is going to be also built in to this case, which I think is kind of a neat solution. And the cool thing about the switch is that it's relatively affordable. It's only got 4 ports, but that in a situation like this, that may be perfectly fine. But the nice thing about this is if you look at the back here, this there's an AC adapter that comes with this switch that you can plug in and plug into a wall outlet to power the switch. But this can also be powered by a 12 volt DC connection. And so I have this little angle adapter and that's mostly to make clearance, because the switch is going to sit right here and it's going to be very close to this. So I want to make a right angle here, and then I have this 12 volt DC connector to a SATA power plug to get the 12 volt from the SATA power plug. right? So that's why I needed that extra SATA power plug and to power the switch. And the nice thing is that this kind of just works out really nicely because the way this switch is set up, the LED activity LEDs are on the side here. So when this gets set up in there, basically you'll be able to see all the activity LEDs through the window of this case. And yeah, and then there'll be the connections kind of just going out that way. And if you had another machine that you wanted to plug into this 10 gig switch, then you could actually just run that cable into the chassis and connect it in here as well. Now, the only drawback is for this particular setup to have a connection, a 10 gig connection between that server and the desktop, this is perfectly fine. And that's because if either of those two computers, the server or the desktop, is powered on, the PSU, this Phanteks Revolt X PSU, remember this is a dual system power supply, all the SATA power connections are going to be powered on if at least one of these systems is on. So if you leave your server on, your desktop is turned off, the switch will be on. If you leave your desktop on but turn off the server, then the switch will still be on. And that's perfectly fine because if you're going to be connecting those two machines, then obviously they're going to be on anyway, and so it's going to power on that switch, and that's great. But if you were connecting this to an say like a third machine or something like that outside of this chassis, if you powered down both the server and the desktop computer, then the power supply is going to shut off the all the power connections, and so then the switch will get powered off. So keep that in mind if you are doing this type of setup and you plan to connect a third or fourth machine to the switch. Just be aware that if you power off everything in this chassis, that switch is also going to power off with it. All right, so yeah. So anyway, yeah, so that's actually kind of an important point regarding the power supply. So let me kind of talk a little bit about that as well. So again, if either the server or the desktop machine is powered on, the other power connections, so the PCIe power connections, the SATA power connections, all that stuff will be turned on. That means that power to these hard drives will be turned on. Now, these drives won't automatically spin up just because the power is on. They do need the HBA controller to basically kind of initialize them. But the problem comes where if you power on your server and you power on your desktop, and the server spins up and that HBA turns on and it starts spinning up all these drives. There's 8 hard drives in here. And then you decide that, well, you don't need your server right now. You want to turn it off. But you leave your desktop machine on because maybe you're using it for something. And you power down your server. Well, the server is going to shut down. This HBA is going to shut off. But these drives that are already spun up will continue to receive power. And so they will continue spinning. The HBA does not automatically shut down these drives when it shuts down. And there's actually some discussion also about the LSI drivers for that controller, that it does not actually send a signal to the drives to spin down or shut down when the card is being shut down. So those hard drives are going to continue spinning unless you intervene. And so in the case of these are SAS drives, there is a way to shut down or tell the drives to spin down at least when the server is shutting down. But that's something that is not there by default. And I may make a video about how to do that. Basically, there's some commands that you can send manually to these drives to tell them to spin down, and you need to set up a dependency so that the shutdown sequence will depend on that task being completed, and that way you can spin down your drives and before you shut down the server altogether, and the drives will spin down even though they will continue to receive power so long as your desktop computer is still running. All right, now if you shut down desktop as well, then of course all the power goes out, and then the drives will also go out as well. So anyway, that's something to I guess make note of, because this is kind of a unique power supply in that it powers two systems, and so there's some of these I guess quirkiness of how it works, and just want to make you guys aware of that, and if you were going to try to do this build yourself. All right guys, so I just plugged the switch to the SATA power and connected the copper cable and the Cat6 cable here. So just wanted to kind of show you what this looks like once everything is plugged in. I haven't powered it on yet, but you'll see that later in this video where I power everything on. But yeah, basically, like I said, this is kind of cool that the activity LEDs and all the other LED indicators are kind of facing the side of the switch. So it makes it very easy to see what's going on through the window of this case. And back here, you'll see that I've got the RJ45 SFP module, and then in the back is the SFP plus stack cable plugged in. And here in the back, you can see there's that right angle connection, and then it goes into the back and plugs into power. So there's enough clearance here, so I don't have to worry about that cable getting caught in the fan over here. And I don't have this secured down necessarily, but I guess if I was concerned enough, I could put some Velcro tape on the bottom of this and kind of have it Velcroed to the bottom of this case here, or the power supply shroud here. But I think it's going to be okay. I don't think it's going to really move around too much in there that I would be concerned about that. But if you were concerned about it, you could get some Velcro tape and just kind of secure it a little bit better. All right, so just want to show you guys what that looks like once it's all connected in there. All right guys, one more thing I want to share with you guys, and this is something that I think is kind of important that most people won't think about, because most setups are not dual system setups. And so that's the chassis fan controls. So all the chassis fans are connected to this fan hub right here, and there's a cable that goes down to the SATA power plugs, and that's what powers this. And it's got several connections. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fan connections. So there's plenty here, and obviously I'm not using all of them, but I have this one that's plugged into the rear fan, and these 3 are plugged into the front fans over here. So you can see the 3 fans up front. And so the question here is, this is a dual system setup. So what happens when one system, let's say your main system's powered off, but your server is still powered on? And in our case, that's actually really important, because the server is the one that's controlling all the hard drives in here. And so those drives are going to be spinning if the server is on, and you want to make sure that those hard drives get enough cooling. So you certainly don't want the situation where if you shut down your desktop PC, that's in this case, that the chassis fans stop. And so I think Phanteks gave some thought into that, and there's some intelligence built into this fan hub. So I have this fan hub plugged into the PWM header on the main PC, right? So you would think like, well, if I shut down the main PC and that PWM signal disappears, are all the fans going to just stop? Well, they don't. So that's the cool thing, is that this fan hub will, as long as it's powered on, remember it's powered on by the SATA plug down here, and as long as one of the systems is on, that SATA power plug is getting power, and so this fan hub is going to be powered on so long as one of the systems or more are powered on. So if you have your server powered on, but your desktop powered down or suspended, this fan hub is still going to get power. And that means that the way this is set up, all the fans will still be spinning. Now, I do have this plugged into the motherboard, the main desktop PC's PWM header. So you might be wondering, well, if that main motherboard powers off, what happens? Well, the default behavior of this fan hub is that if it loses the PWM signal from the desktop PC, that's when you shut it down. And this fan hub is still receiving power because it's getting that power from the SATA connector, and that's powered on because the server might still be on. So if the server is on, desktop's off, this gets powered but it doesn't get PWM signal. Its default behavior is to run all the fans at maximum speed. So it is a little bit noisier, and so that may or may not be acceptable to some people. But the good thing is that, or the good news is that it's not going to allow any of the hard drives to overheat when you power down your desktop computer or suspend it. And so that's a good thing, that it still spins the fans so long as the fan hub is getting power. These fans that came with this case are not very loud to begin with, so even when they're spinning at maximum RPMs, it just really is not that loud compared to, and I guess I'm coming, relative to my experience where I work a lot with the rack mount servers and stuff like that. So it's, to me, still fairly quiet, even if they're running supposedly at maximum RPM, which I think is not that high. I think it's like 1,500 RPM, right? So yeah, coming from a server world where fans spin up to 8,000 RPM, that feels like nothing to me. But I know that may bother some people. And so in that case, I was kind of thinking about that problem. Now, for me, I think this is going to be fine. If the chassis fans are spinning at maximum when the server only is on and the desktop is off, I think that's perfectly fine. It is, you can kind of hear the fan noise a little bit, but it's really not that loud. If this was tucked under a desk somewhere, you probably wouldn't hear it even with the fan spinning that fast at about 1,500 RPM. But if that did bother you, what I was thinking is connecting the PWM connector instead of directly to the desktop PC motherboard, I would put it connected to another fan controller, which I believe Noctua has one. And that has a very similar behavior in that when it loses the PWM signal from its source, or in this case it would be the desktop PC motherboard, that it would then basically send its own PWM signal out to whatever it's connected to. So that would be to this fan hub. And there's a dial on that fan controller so that you can actually control the amount of RPM signal you want to send out to this fan hub. So if it really did bother you, and I might actually just try that out and show you guys if, I'll try to order one and see if I can set that up and kind of show you how that might work, and just try it out and see how that works. But so in that case, basically the Noctua fan controller would pass on the PWM signal from the desktop PC when the desktop PC is on. But when you shut down the desktop PC, it basically overrides that PWM signal with a dial that's on that fan controller. And so you could basically set the speed, your desired speed for this fan hub when the PWM signal from the desktop motherboard is off. So I guess that's one way around this problem. I do kind of wish that Phanteks might have provided some way to say have dual PWM signal input to this fan hub, so that maybe it could look at both signals and see, pick the higher of the two. So whichever machine, whether the server machine or the desktop machine is demanding a certain RPM, pick the highest one and then send that out to all the fans. So I think that would have been kind of a nice feature to have with this fan hub. But at the very least, the way it behaves right now, you're not going to overheat anything just because one of these two systems is powered down. So long as one of the systems is powered on, this fan hub is going to get power, and that fan hub has a default behavior even if it doesn't get a PWM signal from one of the motherboards. So anyway, that was something that was kind of unclear to me on how this fan hub actually would behave, and I was thinking about it, and that's why I was thinking about the Noctua fan controller in case that this was going to basically stop all the fans if the PWM signal went away, but it doesn't do that. And so anyway, just wanted to share that with you guys because I think that wasn't that information is not readily available online, and people have kind of found ways to work around this using other controllers, but it just turns out I think you can basically use that fan hub just the way it is. So I think it's just fine. All right, guys, so last but not least, let's do a powered on demonstration of this system. So I have both the desktop and server hooked up to the same monitor here. The server is hooked up via a VGA video cable, and the desktop is connected via HDMI. So we can simply switch the source on the monitor in order to switch between viewing the desktop versus the server side of this machine. And down here I have a ThinkPad wireless keyboard that is connected to both machines. But basically this has its own USB receiver that's connected to that extension right there. But it also is able to connect via Bluetooth. I have it connected to the desktop via Bluetooth, and I have the USB receiver for this keyboard connected to the server side, and so I can simply switch between Bluetooth or its own USB receiver, and then I can control either the desktop or the server with this single keyboard. And over here I've got this power cord. That's the power cord that's plugged into the power supply of this machine, and I've got a kilowatt here, and I've got this little tiny camera pointing at it, so I'm going to be recording what that kilowatt is reading throughout this video, so that, or this segment of the video at least, so that you can see the various levels of power consumption with this dual desktop slash server hybrid PC. All right, let me kind of show you what the rear looks like and how that's all connected. All right, so this is the server, obviously, and so there's the VGA cable and the Ethernet that goes to the 10 gig switch inside, and then that's a USB extension that is connected to the ThinkPad keyboard receiver. And down here there's that Ethernet cord that goes back inside. There's the DAC cable that also go inside that connects the desktop side to that switch, and there's the HDMI cable, and then I've got Ethernet, and here's the wireless antenna and all that stuff. So, and then there's the power supply that this power cord is the one that's connected to that kilowatt unit. All right, guys, so before we get started, I just want to show you that you can see that the kilowatt is currently reading 0 watts, and that's because I have the switch powered off or turned off on the power supply. So I'm going to go ahead and power that on right now. Okay, just flip the switch on the power supply, and the first thing you might notice is that there's a little bit of RGB activity going on that motherboard. So we know we're getting power there, and if you look at the kilowatt, it's currently reading about 12 watts. So I suspect probably a watt or two maybe are consumed by the RGB on the motherboard, but I suspect that the 10 or so watts is being consumed by the server motherboard because it has a IPMI module on it, and so that is running off of standby power. All right, so let's actually go ahead and power on the desktop side of this machine. All right, so you can see everything coming on. All right, I'm going to go ahead and put the camera on the tripod here. And you can see that the power is now surging to about, well, it hit about 200 watts just a second ago. All right, so we have the system booted up, and the kilowatt is currently reading about 115, 120 watts or so. Yeah, about 115. So that's idle power for the desktop side. Let me go ahead and log in. All right, so there's probably a bunch of little background programs running, but so it's the power consumption is kind of fluctuating between what's like 130 up to 180 every now and then. All right, so it's settling around 133, 132. All right, so that's desktop only. Now I'm going to go ahead and power on the server side. All right, just hit the power switch for the server. And so we have power at 160 watts or so, and you can see the HBA over there lighting up. So, oh, and since, let's see if we can watch the change the source to VGA. All right, so there's the output from the server, the Supermicro. We're still hovering about 165 watts or so. All right, so there's the output message for the LSI BIOS ROM. And you can see the heartbeat is blinking over there. And I don't know if you can hear it, but you can see the activity LEDs. Right now, that's the HBA basically scanning all the drives and spinning them up. So you can see all the activity LEDs blinking there. And we've got 8 Hitachi drives. So I'm going to switch the keyboard over to USB. So we're about 214 watts right now, and that's what the drive spun up. So this is both server, drive spun up. Let's go ahead and boot, and the desktop machine running at the same time. It's roughly about 220, 210 watts. So by the way, in case you haven't been following the videos in the series, I have Fedora Workstation installed on the desktop machine. And right now I have TrueNAS Scale installed on the server motherboard. All right, so we've got the, that's the message that you see when TrueNAS Scale is fully booted up. So nothing that interesting from this perspective, but at least you get to see what's happening during post and stuff like that. I'm going to go ahead and switch the source back to HDMI so we can actually see what's going on the desktop side. But right now we are idling at about 210 to 220 watts of power, and that's for both the desktop side as well as the server side with the 8 hard drives. Alright, so I've switched the input back to the HDMI, and yeah, power is still a little bit above 200 watts basically is what this dual hybrid desktop server computer consumes at idle. So right now, let me just verify that the TrueNAS thing is actually running. So I'll connect to it, and that's connecting over that 10 gig switch right there. Alright, so there's the TrueNAS Scale interface coming up. I'm going to go ahead and suspend the desktop machine, so that's going to basically shut it down. And just wanted to show you guys that the server will still be there. Alright, so I'm just running the suspend command. Alright, so the desktop side is now suspended. You can see the power dropped down to about 130 watts or so. And I don't know if you can hear it from the mic on the camera, but it is now somewhat louder, because I think the fan hub lost the PWM signal from the desktop motherboard, and so now it's just basically controlling all the fans directly, and it kind of just sets them all at max basically. So it's a little bit louder right now. I will take some measurements with a decibel meter. Alright, so anyway, you can see that the HBA is still blinking, and you know, occasionally you'll see some activity, LEDs blinking, but the desktop is completely off right now. It's suspended. You probably won't be able to see it, but that CPU fan is actually stopped right now, and the RGB is still going, but the desktop is now suspended. And you could shut it down fully if you wanted to as well. So all the hard drives are working and all that stuff. So let me go ahead and wake up the machine. Okay, so I just moved the mouse to wake up the machine. You can see the machine's coming out of suspend, and the CPU fan is spinning up, or has spun up, and you probably, I don't know if you'll come through with the mic, but all the fans in the chassis kind of quiet down, and that's because that PWM signal from the desktop motherboard is now back on. So let's go ahead and take some measurements on that. Alright, so here is a decibel meter, and I'm going to hold it about a foot away from the machine, which is going to be about here, and then I'll stop talking. Alright, so it was hovering roughly around 39 to 40 decibels. So that's kind of the noise level that you can expect if you're like basically right next to your PC. And that's with the desktop on. So now I'm going to suspend the desktop again so that you can hear the noise level, or well, you can get a reading of the noise level when the fans are running at max. Alright, so with the desktop suspended, and we're down at about 138 watts or so, which is just running the server side, you could see that the decibel meter was reading about 45 decibels. So we gained about 5 decibels of noise with the fans running at max. Right, so if that's not acceptable, like I said, there is a fan controller that I think will give us more granular control that can be added to the system in order to keep the fans a little bit quieter when the desktop is suspended. But yeah, I may actually order that other fan controller that has a dial from Noctua that will allow us to basically control the fans a little bit better. Now, I don't know if you guys know of a solution where, if you guys know of this, leave a comment, let me know about it, because I don't know of anything that would allow you to, say, take 2 PWM inputs and maybe pick like the higher demand one and output that as an output. If there was such a device, I think that would be more ideal, because even with the Noctua controller, you can manually dial in the fan speed that you want, but if the system was getting really hot, that fan controller wouldn't know anything about it, and so it would just kind of keep the fans at whatever level. So you might dial that fan controller down to quiet the system, but it might not be able to adequately cool the system, and if the server's having problems managing heat, it doesn't have any way to control the chassis airflow. So that's one drawback of that method. You can quiet it down, I believe, And I'll probably make a follow-on video to demonstrate that when I order that fan controller. Let me kind of turn the desktop back on. So I'll go ahead and turn this off. This is the last part of this series. Like I said, I might make a follow-on video to talk about the fan controller thing and all that if I get that fan controller. But at least for the planned part of this video series, this will be the last part. Let me know what you guys think about this desktop hybrid PC build. Is this something that would be interesting to you? Would you do the same thing? How would you do it differently? Leave your comments down below and let me know. Alright guys, so that's it for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video or the series of videos. And if you haven't seen the other parts, I'll leave a link down in the video description to the first 2 parts of this video series, so you can go check those out. Alright, so if you like this video, be sure to give me that thumbs up. And if you're new to this channel and you like this sort of stuff, consider subscribing to the channel. Also, if you want to support my channel, go check out my eBay store. I have the greatest selection of pre-flashed IT mode HBA SAS controllers for your ZFS, TrueNAS, and Unraid server builds. So go check out my eBay store. I'll leave a link down in the video description. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.